dogma lesson, just not bothering to plan? That's a question for TEFLologists. When I read this book, is it better to skim or scan? That's a question for TEFLologists. Can you be a good teacher if you have a CELTA? Or should you invest in an MA or a Delta? From politics to methodology, we'll discuss them all on TEFLology.
Welcome back to the TEFLology podcast, a podcast all about teaching English as a foreign language and related matters. For this episode, we're delighted to present an interview with Joan Kang Shin. Like our previous interview with Paul Nation, this interview was recorded at the JOUT 2015 conference in Shizuoka, Japan. Dr. Shin works at the University of Maryland, Baltimore, where she specializes in professional development programs for teaching English as an international language to young learners and teenagers. She's also the series editor for a 6-level primary English series for National Geographic Learning called Our World. Her most recent book, co-authored with Jodie Crandall, is the award-winning Teaching Young Learners English. She's also an active member of the online ELT community, conducting both webinars and digital video conferences. We'll provide a link to Dr. Shin's website, where you can find more information about her. Matthew and Rob joined her for a chat after her plenary presentation titled The 21st Century Meets Professional Development, to find out more about her work. We hope you enjoyed today's interview.
Okay, so this is Matthew.
This is Rob.
And we're sitting here with Joan Kang Shin. We're at JOUT 2015 conference. Thank you very much, Joan, for agreeing to talk to us today.
Oh, you're welcome. It's my pleasure.
Great, thank you. So we thought maybe we'd just start with some general, actually, if it's possible for you to kind of give a general self-introduction and a brief career of your history so far.
Okay, so right now I'm a professor of practice in the education department at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, or as we call it, UMBC.
Okay.
And at UMBC, I'm the director of TEFL professional training programs.
Okay.
And there we have lots of online professional development courses for English teachers who are actually all over the world. And it's been a really exciting program because we've actually had teachers in our courses from over 100 countries.
Wow.
And so, yeah, it's been an exciting way to actually learn about what's happening in English language teaching around the world.
Okay.
And my specific area of interest is on the teaching of English to young learners.
Right.
Okay, great. Could you talk a little bit about maybe how you arrived at where you are now?
Well, let's see. I guess I could say that, like other English teaching professionals, I didn't start out as an English teacher. In fact, my first degree was in economics from Cornell University, and I did a number of jobs. I worked for an international trading company and a lawyer in Washington, D.C., and many different things. I guess it was when I was working for the lawyer in D.C., that, I was really bored in that job. And somebody was telling me about an opportunity to volunteer in the community to teach an English class. They were really desperate to find someone to teach this class. And, the class was actually full of Hispanic adults, most of whom were not literate in their first language. And I just said, okay, I'll help out. And that's when I got the teaching bug. And I just fell in love with my students. I fell in love with their stories and decided, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back to school and I'm going to study how to teach English. So that's how I started. And then, so after that initial experience, volunteering, then going back to the university, I had a number of teaching jobs, teaching, in high school, in the U.S., and then also at University of Maryland, teaching university students English. And then I decided, after getting my master's degree, that I want to go abroad and teach. And I ended up going to Korea, and I lived in Seoul for 5 years. I taught at an international school, Seoul Foreign School, for a year, and then I got a job to work preparing teachers in a TESOL certificate program at Sukkyong Women's University in Seoul. And that's where I spent 4 years really learning about what's happening with English language teaching in Korea, in particular young learners, because they, at that time, had just lowered the age of English education in the primary schools to 3rd grade. And and then I really got the experience of how to prepare teachers for the classroom.
Nice. And was that what made you initially interested in working with young learners, that experience?
You know what? Actually, my experience with young learners goes way back.
Right.
And my first job teaching ever was, in fact, when I was in high school. So at the time, I'd studied music extensively. So I was studying music when I was in high school, and my mom actually, I guess you could say, volunteered me to be the music teacher at our church because they needed a Sunday school teacher to teach kids music and songs. And so, of course, as a high school student, I was like maybe 15, I didn't want to spend my Sunday mornings doing this, and the kids in Sunday school didn't really want to spend their Sunday mornings sitting in Sunday school class. And so actually, I think that's when I first learned ways to engage little kids, and through music and through song. And so that was my initial experience, and in the end I really liked it. Of course, I did all these other things, but the funny thing is now my focus in terms of teaching young learners is the use of songs and music and movement to engage little kids, and which brought me to some of the publications that I have, right? The textbook for teaching kids through song.
Okay, great. I think maybe there are also books about using music for teaching adults. So I was wondering, what are some of the significant differences that you've noticed between teaching young learners and adults?
Well, I guess it all depends on where they are developmentally. And they're not really looking at language in the same way, right? I mean, they're not even thinking about it, right? So in terms of teaching kids through the use of songs, when we're talking about 3, 4, 5-year-old kids, in fact, you have to kind of just take a look at them as learners. They're actually, we use songs naturally to teach them not just their native language, but also content about the world around them.
Right.
And so it's sort of a natural way for them to actually learn language and content simultaneously. And so that was really where I started to think, hey, we could use children's songs, but also maybe even from around the world, because English is now a global language. So this is kind of the focus of my research. So it's really like meeting little kids where they are developmentally in the ways in which they want to learn, and then using the same types of activities and techniques to teach another language.
Right. And you mentioned that you taught in Korea and you've taught in the United States, and English is a global language. So have you noticed any differences about the approaches to teaching young learners in different countries around the world?
I guess I would say there are some differences, but there's more similarities, I think, than there are differences, in fact. There has been more of a focus on, like grammatical elements of language, and everybody knows that. And I do see, kind of this switch to not necessarily focusing on the grammar or explicit teaching of grammar with kids. Almost everywhere, there's a shift, and it all is a result of, the age of English language teaching being lowered, right, gradually down to 3rd grade and then 1st grade. And but because of that, usually, I see like the same shift, which is the Ministry of Education, right, will then say, okay, we're going to start learning English in 3rd grade now, whereas it was 7th grade before. And then, okay, we're going to put English teachers, or we're teaching 7th graders or even high school teachers in the classroom with young learners. Okay, so of course there is, kind of this learning curve where they get into the classroom and realize, like, the stuff I was using with high school students is really not working out very well, right, with my 7-year-old students. And so, you start to see this shift, right, happening everywhere. And now I would say, you see more and more that there is attention to, well, what are good teaching methods that are based on how children learn. But yeah, so it's sometimes the cultural differences that I see are just based on maybe sort of the culture of the classroom. So in some places, it can be different in terms of expectation of the teacher role and the student role in the classroom, right? And sometimes it's just how kids are expected to sit and move, and their demeanor. Sometimes that is different as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. So hopefully this isn't too tricky a question, or don't worry if you can't think of an example straight away. But we were wondering if you could think of an example of a young learner or student that you've had who has made a significant impact on you.
Well, I mean, one of the students I worked with is actually not so young, but this was actually in the United States, and the student was from Vietnam. And in fact, he had grown up in a refugee camp for part of his life, had interrupted schooling. And when I was trying to teach him some concepts that he needed to start to learn and be able to express in English, like, for example, recycling, which is something you're supposed to learn. He was having trouble, but for me, it was hard for me to assess at that time why. And it turned out that, one, of course, living in a refugee camp, I think, they're recycling everything, actually. Like just to talk about it, in a place where there isn't much waste, like where we live. Okay, so there was that. The other was that the example that we were talking about had to do with, trying to recycle newspapers. But he hadn't actually learned or made a connection that the newspapers and paper came from trees. So, because of the interrupted schooling, he didn't have those concepts. And, one of the reasons why it's so meaningful to me was like, he taught me so much about how, one, you can't just make assumptions on background knowledge. Also, you really, really, really have to look into, focus on the learner, right? Like the theme of this conference. You have to really know your learners and really tap into their experiences, which can be unique, which can be so different to your own. So he's one student that it really changed my view.
Right.
Yeah.
And a lot of teachers, especially perhaps in the UK, or trained in the UK, are trained to teach adults, but they find themselves, when they go abroad, teaching children. What advice would you give to a teacher who finds themselves in that situation, teaching children for the first time?
First of all, I guess I would say, don't get too frustrated, because, of course, you're going to have a lot of difficulty in terms of managing the classroom. So the first thing you've got to know is, about children's behavior, about how to engage them in activities where they can be active and can move around. And you really do have to start to learn about child development and how children are at different ages in order to really understand how to better manage them. And the other thing is, I guess the fundamental thing is, children are completely different from adults in terms of their perspective in the world, as well as of language and the use of it, right? So, I always try to tap into my inner child and to take myself back to when I was a child. So for some of us, that's easier than others, maybe, but to really put yourself in the shoes of a child and then start there, I think.
Great. Okay. Maybe we'd like to ask a few questions now about the theme or the focus of your talk today, which was online professional development. So that's something that you're engaged in at the moment. What form does it take, the online professional development that you do?
Well, so in our programs we have short-term professional development courses. So they can either be 5 weeks or 10 weeks. And they're on a variety of topics, of course. My courses are teaching English to young learners and teaching English to teens. But I also teach a course on TEFL, program administration, and we have basic methodology classes and classes on assessment. And Most of our participants are actually teachers who are either nominated, say, by the U.S. Embassy and it's funded by the U.S. Department of State, or an educational institution that provides English classes will contact us, and we'll have a whole cohort of teachers from those institutions. So they're usually brought to us in groups, not by kind of individual enrollment. So they're all sponsored, and that's really why we've had participants from all over the world, because we've been working in cooperation with lots of U.S. embassies that are all over. We also have some other online programs to engage young adults. And so these online courses, again, the students that are nominated to take it are usually through U.S. embassies. But the course that we're really focused on is called the Youth Community Leadership Challenge. And it is a course that is like a content-based English language course, but it focuses on the topics of social responsibility, civic engagement, community leadership, and trying to talk to students in the class, teach them about service learning, and teaching them to look at their communities and see what assets there are in the communities, but also what problems exist in the communities, and to try to come up with a way to make their community a better place. So they end up creating these social action projects after they do this analysis. And we try to teach them how, like, ways in which you can engage with your community and find ways to actually do these social action projects. Yeah.
Nice. In terms of teacher training and professional development in that sphere, what are some of the challenges of online professional development for both the trainer and the teachers?
Yeah. So I guess some of the challenges would be, first of all, a lot of times we will have instructors who are content area experts, but they have no experience in online teaching. Okay, so you can, have this situation where the experts in a particular area really need help with like technical support, but the issue is actually, you can find someone to give you technical support with your learning management system, but in fact, you need someone who can communicate with the instructor and find out what are the objectives of this course, what can you do in this sort of virtual setting in order to meet these objectives with participants who are all around the world. And so you actually need to have someone who is also skilled in instructional design. They might not be the content expert, but they need to be able to also give advice and, how can we accomplish this with only these online tools that we have, right? So I think that is one challenge and something I've learned, that you can't just have someone like at the end of a help desk phone line to help you to design something that's going to be effective for teachers, right? So there's that, and then on the other end, of course, it's a new environment for learning. So for the teachers who are first enrolled, we have to have a really robust orientation to not just a learning management system, but the mode of instruction, the approach to the instruction, the expectations, because it's all a new place, right? So, yeah.
Okay, great. You mentioned expectations, and maybe that's touching on assessment of how you assess the teachers online. You mentioned in your talk about maybe some of the challenges of grading the quality of meaningful online interactions.
Yes.
Just wondering, how do you go about doing that?
Yes. Well, we have rubrics.
Okay.
So, we require a certain number of posts. These posts have to have a certain number of words. Okay, so there are these requirements. But we're mostly concerned with the quality of the interaction. And so in the rubrics, we actually devised a rubric that incorporates the number of posts as well as the quality. It's pretty complex, and it actually took probably like a whole year of and drafts of it where 3 instructors, including myself, were trying to really find a way to do it that's simple enough that our new instructors could just pick it up and like realize, oh, okay, like this is how you can rate it. So it actually is published in a book about online teacher education. So we put the whole rubric in this book chapter, which you could look up on my Google site, and because we have found that is the best way. So of course the participants see the rubric before any interaction actually starts, and it's just really helped to be able to get the type of interaction that we want, because of what we believe, right? That social interaction truly is going to work towards construction of new knowledge or finding resolutions to issues, right?
Right. On the topic of interaction, and you talked about the roles of the starter and the wrapper in these online interactions. One of our Twitter followers asked, how could the roles of the starter and the wrapper be applied in a face-to-face course?
Well, actually, I would say that so for the starters and the wrappers, I think that you definitely can apply to a face-to-face course. I know that in our, graduate courses, we, sometimes have something similar where you have readings, for that particular week, and people are designated to be responsible for leading the discussion. And they really do have to prepare questions. They have to think about, their colleagues or their fellow students in the course, and think about the audience, think about the content, and try to sort of lead the discussion. But I will say that you can definitely do that in a face-to-face situation. But I think that the advantage or sort of the beauty of online discussions, which are asynchronous and they're not happening in real time, is that the students or the teachers, whoever the participants are, have time to read a question, think about it, or read somebody's response and think about it and provide a thoughtful response. I myself, in class, I am not the type of learner, I've never been the type of learner to just volunteer right away to talk. And sometimes if the conversation or discussion in class is going really quickly, I need more time actually to think about it more critically before I'll feel like I have a response. So I know that especially for people who are learning English as a second or foreign language, and if they're engaging in discussions with others in English, gosh, you need that time, because I'm just talking about discussions in English, which is my native language, and it's not always easy, right? So I think that is why these online discussions can be such an advantage, right, when we're talking about English learners. But certainly it can be applied in a face-to-face situation. Those moderators need to be prepared. And probably if you have the wrapper, I would say you would probably need more time to wrap it up and maybe provide the final wrap up maybe the next week and go over it, because the summary of ideas and stuff, that is really the most difficult, and it takes a really high level of thinking and language to pull it together. So
So maybe that's one example of one of the advantages of online versus face-to-face, like you mentioned, having the time to think about it. What are some other possible advantages or things that you can achieve online that maybe you can't do face-to-face?
Well, one is just simple convenience.
Yep, sure.
Because you can do it from your home or your office. Even locally, when in Maryland, where I live, I had a program where I was providing professional development for in-service teachers in Baltimore County. Now, Baltimore County exists around Baltimore, and just to get to one location, everyone's going to have to go around the Beltway, and the traffic is so horrible. And so we really needed to provide a blended learning, because these teachers work till a certain time, have after-school activities. To get around traffic in rush hour is so inconvenient. And so, that is one thing, right? And that's why blended learning or online learning can be convenient for professionals who have busy lives. I guess the other thing is, in terms of what I really believe in 21st century learning is that so much communication is happening online. So much communication is happening, not just online in writing, but also through Skype or through other sort of web tools. And I do think that people need the opportunity in a class to be able to practice that type of communication, get skilled at it, have opportunities to even get feedback on it before they necessarily get out there in the workplace. If we're talking about our students, I think it's not even an advantage. It's almost like it is a necessity now, right? To be able to integrate some of these ideas into the classroom.
Right. The idea of the connected teacher, is that the phrase that...
the network teacher.
So the network teacher,
Yeah.
right. So do you think that is a necessity for modern language teachers?
Yeah, I do. I really do. I know everybody's on their own learning curve in terms of technology, and it's always changing. There are always new applications and new software, and the latest things that your students are using that you don't even know about, and you may figure out about years later. But actually, something that I will share with you that really changed my view on this for teachers who are intimidated or not sure how to integrate technology. So, Mark Prensky, who coined the terms digital natives, digital immigrants, he also had this message for educators where Mark Prensky talked about the nouns and the verbs of education related to technology. And which is cool for language teachers, right? But he talked about sort of the verbs as being kind of these unchanging skills, right? Like presenting information, thinking critically, right? Calculating things correctly. These are things that educators are always trying to teach their students to do. And then the nouns. So the nouns of education are actually all of these tools, technology tools, right? So that's like the latest app, or that's like the software you're using now, or things that your students are using. And of course, you need to teach both, right, to your students. But in fact, what I was thinking was that, those nouns are always changing. Right? You can't keep up with the nouns, right? I mean, there's like the next thing, and then that your students are aware of, you don't know about. So to try to keep up with the nouns is just this like never-ending challenge. But as educators, to become skilled in teaching those verbs about how to think critically, how to weave through information and determine if it's accurate or useful. I mean, those are things we can teach our students, and it doesn't matter how they're getting the information or what app they're using. And so, I just love this, to think about it in terms of these nouns and verbs, because teachers can then see, I am empowered to teach my students those verbs, those, skills that don't change, right? So I mean, that's the message I would have to educators about integrating technology. Let your students choose the nouns that they're going to end up using, right? You don't even have control over that, right? Focus on those verbs, and that'll help them to, say, for example, whatever social network they're using now, it'll help them think about how to present themselves, more responsibly or safely, or, in a way that's not going to affect their future, right? Or in a way that, helps them to present themselves and information, accurately. So,
And just finally, regarding the idea of the network teacher, in your talk you mentioned one of your trainee teachers who was living in Pakistan, who didn't have very stable access to the internet. Is there a danger if you focus on the idea of the network teacher that there's a kind of an inequality, different level, because of levels of access to teachers?
Yes, there definitely is a level of inequality, right? Not everybody has access. And I would say, so that teacher actually was from Afghanistan, and there was so much going on at the time. But I could say the same thing for a lot of teachers and students in inner city Baltimore. Okay, so there were situations where, we actually had that youth community leadership course, so we had students who were all from different countries in Central America, but we also enrolled students who were from an inner city Baltimore school, who, they were all refugees and came from different countries. We enrolled them together. And so, the kids at the school, they couldn't access this online course at the school. because there wasn't internet access, you know? And in fact, they ended up, opening up our Blackboard on their smartphones, and that was how they got on. So there isn't equality in access, but I will say that's one reason why things are shifting to mobile devices, because in fact, that is a way that more people have access, to information, and that's the basic reason for the shift. So in places, these sort of like low bandwidth areas and stuff, to get onto some sort of landline takes what was happening with this teacher in Afghanistan, right? To travel hours to try to access the course, and we're finding that in certain sort of low resourced countries, that there is more access through mobile devices. So things are changing, but there isn't equal access, and so that is always something that for us we have to think about when we're offering, the courses that we have. Right.
Okay. I think we'll finish there. So thank you very much again for your time. We
Great.
really appreciate it. Yep.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
Great.
Yeah, nice to meet you all.
Nice to meet you.
Thanks for listening today. We hope you enjoyed the interview as much as we enjoyed making it. Just a reminder, if you'd like to get in contact with us, you can email us at teflology@gmail.com, or you can follow us on Twitter @teflology. We've also recently put together a new website. It's still work in progress, but please feel free to check it out. The website is teflology-podcast.com. So thanks again, and we'll return with some future episodes soon.